Okay, we are live now. Hello and a warm welcome to those of you joining this webinar on open science in Horrizon Europe. This is actually a very important topic for us here at My Science Work because it is at the core of all that we do here. So it's a topic very close to our hearts, and over the year we've organized many events around the topic, and we will most certainly continue to talk on this topic that still has a great deal to be said and a great deal to be done. So open science continues to receive a lot of attention from scholars, policymakers, and international development agencies, in large part due to the promised benefits of new practices. So today's webinar will be a discussion of this movement, especially in the context of open science in Horrizon Europe, and how the Horrizon Europe will potentially bridge this gap, this innovation gap in Europe, and what these policies and principles look like. And finally, for the benefit of the large community of researchers who are following us here, our expert panelists will also present insights into the evaluation of proposals in the open science program. First things first, on behalf of My Science Work and all those who are joining us live today, I would like to very warmly welcome our experts of the day. We have Ms. Alea López de Román. She is a policy officer at the European Commission Directorate, and she will be joining us. She's experiencing some technical difficulties in joining us live, but hopefully she will be here to present her works on the Open Science Unit, where she contributes to the development and implementation of the EU policy on open access to scientific results. Before joining the European Commission, Ms. Sanguma coordinated the Information and Open Access Policy Group at the League of European Research Universities. Her areas of expertise includes international relations, EU research policy, open access, and EU science diplomacy. Understanding EU science diplomacy was one of the most recent publications. We also have Dr. Dimitri Corpakis. He is a former senior EU official. He, in fact, led the European Commission's DG Research and Innovation Unit on the regional dimension of innovation, and has over 30 years of experience on the European integration process. During his time in the Commission, he served in many policy areas spanning from education and training and the information society to social sciences and humanities and regional innovation ecosystems. We also have Dr. Tim Errington. He is the Director of Research at the Center of Open Science, which is a nonprofit organization in Virginia, USA, that has a mission to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scientific research. So Dr. Errington, in his role, he collaborates with researchers and various stakeholders from across scientific disciplines and organizations on projects aimed to understand the current research process and also to evaluate the initiatives designed to increase reproducibility and openness of scientific research. And finally, we also have Mr. Xavier Aubry. He is, in fact, the founder and managing partner of ZAS Ventures. For those of you who are not familiar with ZAS Ventures, it's one of the most active consulting firms in Europe on the Horizon 2020 program. Mr. Aubry has been involved in EC-funded research and innovation projects for over 15 years. Under his tenure in ZAS Ventures, he has helped over 200 deep tech innovators to raise over 450 million of funding to bring their technologies to the market. And he has personally been involved in supporting some 60 EIC accelerator interviews since 2018, resulting in 31 companies being awarded the EIC accelerator funding. So his latest project is the Da Vinci Labs, which is a visionary project to promote the cross-disciplinary development of deep tech innovation, tackling the world's most pressing societal challenges. So on behalf of everyone, once again, I would like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar. So let's hop straight into the webinar. Open science is a paradigm shift in how global research systems produce and also communicate knowledge. And depending on how you look at it, open science is either a gradual evolutionary shift or a radical revolution. And this is from the brilliant scientist and leading activist for the open science movement, the late Dr. Jonathan Tennant. And without further ado, I invite Dr. Dimitri Corpakis to present an overview of open science movement, so naturally open access to scientific publications and data, and its scientific, societal, and economic impact. Over to you, Dr. Corpakis.
Thank you very much, Sally, for this introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, a big disclaimer. As Sally said, I was working in the European Commission for over 30 years, but now I am on retirement. And so what I'm going to tell you, it's not representing the European Commission, because I do not represent the Commission anymore. And in any case, I will not give you advice how to win an Horrizon project. I think this is advice that will come from other speakers in this seminar. Let me share my screen now to give you a little bit my presentation. I hope you can see it. So my presentation is on open science, on the open science movement, and as I said, in the coming age of Creative Commons. When we are talking about open science, you think about, of course, different things, but this is inextricably linked with the development of the internet. And I had the chance to witness this in the first steps of my career. It was a fascinating experience because it was the first years that I have entered also the European Commission. And we can safely say that the internet has revolutionized the way scholarly information is produced, stored, and exchanged, leading to a new paradigm of creating and diffusing scientific knowledge, content, and data. Everybody knows email today. It's actually a lot of people start to abandon it, but it was a big invention at the time. And we were using other stranger things that are still in practice, but few people use, for example, file transfer protocol. We were using primitive Archie and Gaffer search technologies, and all this have evolved to sophisticated collaborative tools, online repositories, collaboratories, online scientific notebooks, and preprint archives that are actually enabling the open science movement. This movement tends to escape the traditional paper routes for scholarly publishing. As you may well understand, is creating enormous tensions and divisions in the scientific press communities. And as any social movement, it has its proponents and opponents. However, history has always been advancing through tensions, and this is what I will try to tell you about in these presentations. Some key dates in the history of the internet that actually marked this whole development, and they had enabled this movement. I would go as early as 1957, where the ex-Soviet Union had launched Sputnik, the first man-made Earth satellite, which alarmed the Western world, and in response, the United States created DARPA to send a response to the growing technological lead of the Soviet Union to secure military R&D at the time. It was really a different world at the time, where I can remind you we were in the Cold War phase. So gradually, first of all, 1969, the embryonic part of the internet as we know it today, the ARPANET, was set up for networking research. Later on, as we go down the road, there was, of course, a military branch that was separated in 1983, the MILNET, and then the ARPANET was really devoted to academic research. And then the first European Academic Research Network, EARN, was established. As we go over, I have put here different dates, But it's important to take a step to remember that the World Wide Web that was released at CERN by CERN Tim Berners-Lee, now who was working at the time as an intern in CERN, it was only in 1991, and that was a real kickoff of the internet as we know, because it was the first step to popularize the internet and to make it more accessible to everybody. And as we go over, you remember that the first US High Performance Computing Act under Al Gore introduced the National Research and Education Network, the NREN, that was really poised to become the real internet backbone later on at the development, the explosive internet development as we knew it in the first years of the 90s. If we go on open science, you will have to understand that everybody has a different view, and two sociologists, Feher and Frezike, if I pronounce them correctly, have come up with a particular taxonomy on the trend shaping open science. And you have the infrastructure schools that focus on technological architecture, the public school that focuses more on accessibility of knowledge creation, the measurement school that have been paying attention to alternative impact assessment, hence all the altmetrics movement, the democratic school that centered on access to knowledge, and then the pragmatic school that focused on collaborative research. And if I was to capture in one diagram the open science different components, I would say that this is one of the most complete figures that I have found on Wikipedia. And actually, you can see that everything is there, and everything has a particular influence on the whole movement of open science, because starting from open source software, open data, increasingly more importantly, open access publication, but you have also open educational resources, the open access to research and data, and so forth. So if you go also on the open science taxonomy, you will see the increasing importance of open access to data, because this is linked with what we call science ethics, because we have seen, unfortunately, a lot of attempts for fraud in science because of the temptation of people believing that because we were talking about open science, they were also more or less allowed to cheat on that. So we have to be able to have reproducibility of data and scientific experiments. And so we need to have more access to open data to be able to verify this data. And this links, of course, to open science evaluation, open science policies, and all the tools that allow us to go down this road. The major impact of when we talk about open science, of course, as I said at the beginning, is the scholarly publishing. And this have immensely evolved over the years, although it is not yet at the level of practice that we wanted to see happening. Because if you go on and look, for example, the latest survey of the European University Association, you will see that this is still, I wouldn't say marginal, but it's still a practice that has to be still fully developed. So because before the big digitization trend, commercial journals dominated the scientific publishing scene. And because we have competing scientific journals, we came up with the concept of the impact factor that actually dominates the future of researchers. You know, the famous slogan, publish or perish, that actually defines the careers of researchers as they go along. And but when the researchers started to realize the benefits of the internet, as paper gradually is being displaced by inexpensive network computers, scholarly publishing gave a way to open access movement. So bringing the negotiation table scholars and scholarly organizations with conventional publishers. And so this is the way everything has started. And there is an inevitable discussion, of course, on access rights that brings us the most difficult tensions of the different publishing models that have open access in focus. So open access is difficult to define, but if you try to see what is the bottom line, I would say that open access is a set of principles and a range of practices within which research outputs are distributed online, free of cost, free also of all other barriers. And there is also a misconception that open access goes beyond peer review, which is not correct, because you can still have open access and you can still have the peer-reviewed process, which actually is important for quality and excellence in research. And but it is also an important dimension is that open access means also the scientific information is not only provided free to the user, but it is also free reusable. So there are no legally binding definitions on open access, but we have a movement that has gone through different important conferences. For example, the Budapest Declaration in 2002 and the Berlin Declaration in 2003 have come very close to a legal definition, although not binding. This is important to stress that the basic elements are not only the right to read, download, and print, but also the right to copy, distribute, search, link, crawl, and mine, because we are talking also about data and text mining. Open access is not contradictory with commercial exploitation, because you can still protect your knowledge and your research and patent your findings before going on open access mode. But this is something that you have to think clearly before you decide what path you are going to take. And it is not, as I said at the beginning, foregoing the very important peer review academic process, but you have to organize it in a very different way. So broadly speaking, we distinguish the so-called green open access, where in most cases you deposit your manuscript, which is peer-reviewed, on a preprint archive, but it is embargoed until the publisher gives you, a period by which they can also protect their subscriptions, because we should not forget that scientific journals and publishers have also somehow contributed to success of, and they are until now also somehow the safeguards of scientific reputation, whether we like it or not. Then there is the so-called gold open access, where everything is free to the final user, and in most cases to the authors, but somebody has to pay the cost because, as you know, there is no free lunch. So somebody has to take on board the cost of the so-called author processing charges, the APCs, but in most cases this is taken on board by the university or research organization for which the researcher is affiliated. And so this is the route that we favor for the future. So as I said, you have to take a decision, and this could be a decision tree at the beginning, or when you do your research and you have to decide what you're going to do with your data and with your knowledge. So if you want to exploit, protect, and the closer you are to the market, the more, of course, you have to think about patenting. And then the more you are closer to an academic route, then you can go on and deposit your research to a preprint archive and go either for green or golden access. But you can also combine these two elements. An important aspect, of course, is the open access to research data. And for this, I'm pretty sure you are going to listen more in the follow-up of this event, because Horizon 2020 already made somehow an obligation for fully funded research that data has to be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Thereby open access, and this is now part and parcel of the concept of open science. And this is very much linked now with another flagship European project. This is now going full speed ahead, the so-called European Open Science Cloud, which is in a state of development. To give you just a hint on the importance of open access to data, I will just give you the example of the pandemic, where the genomic information on the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus published information gave actually very quickly access to the development of adequate testing almost immediately within the first 30 days of the pandemic, and crucially to the development of our potent vaccines that we have now. And of course, these data are extremely important in economic terms. This is why we suggest that public access to public information, public research data is actually very important for the future of research. Very quickly, what is the Open Science Cloud? It will create a trusted European environment for hosting and processing research data for European researchers, and you will offer more than to 1.7 million European researchers a digital shared safe space for storing, managing, analyzing, and reusing of data, and also applications, and more importantly, will be also free of charge. This just to give you an idea of the architecture of the cloud. It will have a sectoral layer, but it will also have a governance and data service layer, which is very important for the future of European science. And of course, it will also be open to cooperation at international terms. A word on Plan S that you have probably heard about. The Plan S is a plan from publishers and funders of European research organizations to install full and immediate open access to scientific publication. And behind it is the Coalition S, which is an international consortium that you can see the principles. It actually goes beyond what we know today, because it is it talks about with effect from 2021 all scholarly publications that are funded by public or private grants will have to be open access on open access platforms or open access journals. Now, not everybody is, of course, in agreement with open access with the Coalition S principles, but I just wanted to give you the logos here of all of major organizations that is behind this movement, to tell you that this is a very strong and potentially critical factor for open science in Europe, and it will really shape the future as we go along. Now, as I'm going to finish my presentation, just keep in mind that we're going towards better science through openness, more efficient science with a lot of new technical standards, of course, better governance for science, because as I said, principles on reproducibility, replication, quality checks, no fraud, less plagiarism, more open copyright access with open access and Creative Commons. Creative Commons is a movement started in the United States. Actually, it's an organization behind this, and you will have seen a lot of open access license under Creative Commons. There are basically 6 types. I'm not going to give you details of this because we have no time, but keep in mind that there is one tailored for your own needs. But if you decide to do this, you have to respect this in every detail so that you do not really discredit the movement of Creative Commons. And you will see that you will have the possibility to have such a license for each and every occasion. So it's important to study a little bit more on this, on the detail, but for me, clearly, this is the future of scholarly publishing. A word on something that is very, very recent. Actually, it came after I had almost completed my presentation last week. On the 16th of July, the Commission has put its proposal for a Council recommendation on a Pact for Research and Innovation in Europe. And actually, it's the first time that the Commission uses Article 182, paragraph 5 of the Treaty of Lisbon as a legal basis. Of course, this is a recommendation. If you have a recommendation, it is not legally binding, but it's also a reminder to the member states that if the Commission wants to go towards legally binding ideas about the European research area, it is perfectly possible. And you will read in one of the priority areas for joint action that the Commission really supports a truly open science culture across the Union, including multilingualism, supporting the development of open science skills, and further developing and integrating the underpinning digital infrastructure and services. So we are heading towards an era of open science, which is a nomenclature of the European research area on open science. And before finishing, I will give credits to my colleagues in the Commission on the unit of open science. You will see the names on the screen. One of them will be talking also in this presentation. And I would like to end up here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Corpakis. That's a fantastic introduction into the webinar. It's a solid foundation. This is a reminder to the attendees, if you have any questions for Dr. Dimitri Corpakis or for any of the other panelists, please feel free to drop the question on the chat, which you'll find below. And we will try to address as many as possible during the Q&A. So, open science is a policy priority for the European Commission, and just as much as open science research methods and its outputs are widely available for rigorous review and scrutiny, so should the policies and the practices surrounding these two should be assessed, scrutinized, and debated on. So on that note, I warmly welcome Ms. Alea Lopez Sanguma to share her insights into what these open science practices that are composed in the Horrizon Europe Open Science Program are. Over to you, Ms. Sanguma. You are on mute, Ms. Sanguma.
Thank you very much, Ali, and good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for that. I guess you can see my screen now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So given that we have 15 minutes, I'm going to go straight to the topic, which is open science in Horrizon Europe. I'm going to close this. Okay. So we have seen an evolution in the framework programs of the European Commission since open science started which is an element, open access, that remains still at the very core of our open science policy in FP7, then the evolution in Horizon 2020, and the expansion with a pilot on open research data, 2017. Also with a little bit broader scope. And now in Horrizon Europe, what is new is that we cover the concept of open science. So we go beyond open access towards open science, including, of course, open access. And open science is embedded across Horrizon Europe in the evaluation of proposals, in the grant agreement, in the obligations that our beneficiaries have, also some obligations that may arise via work programs or calls. We provide different guidelines on how to meet those, and also in the reporting during the project's lifetime. So I'm going to focus here on the mandatory open science practices per the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. And we can say that there are three categories of broad categories of open science obligations according to the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement, which focus on open access to scientific publications, research data management, and additional open science practices. With regard to open access to scientific publications, our beneficiaries must ensure open access to peer-reviewed scientific publications related to their results. How? They must ensure that at the latest upon publication, they deposit either the AAM, the author-accepted manuscript after peer review, accepted for publication after peer review, or the version of record, the published version, in a trusted repository, and that they provide immediate open access. They must ensure the provision of immediate open access via the repository under a Creative Commons Attribution or equivalent license, a CC BY. We also accept CC BY non-commercial, CC BY non-derivatives, or the combination of the two for long text formats, such as books or monographs. And beneficiaries must also ensure that information is provided via the repository about any research output, tool, or instrument that are needed to validate the conclusions of the scientific publication. On top of that, we have also requirements with regard to metadata, which must be open under a Creative Commons public domain dedication or equivalent, and in line with the FAIR principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, and provide information about the licensing terms and persistent identifiers, amongst others. Beneficiaries or authors must retain sufficient intellectual property rights to comply with the open access requirements. This is a very important provision that we have included both in the Horrizon Europe regulation and in the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement, and that requires authors to retain enough IPR to meet their open access requirements. So they have to make sure that they don't assign or give away those IPRs that would enable them to comply with the open access obligations they have per the Model Grant Agreement. And publication can be in the venue of their choosing, but publication fees are reimbursable only if publishing venue is full open access. What do we mean by full open access? Those publishing venues, platforms, journals in which all content is openly accessible to everyone. Those venues in which some content is openly accessible, but some content is only accessible closed access to subscribers, for example, are considered hybrid venues, and our beneficiaries can publish there, but publication fees will not be reimbursed. So what are the novelties here with regard to Horizon 2020? We can say the requirement of provided immediate open access, the concept of trusted repositories. The annotated grant agreement that will be very shortly be published will provide more information on what we consider to be trusted repositories, open licenses, retention of sufficient IPR, and publication fees only reimbursable in full open access venues. So that is with regard to open access to scientific publications. The second set of conditions, or the second pillar category, with regard to the obligations in the Model Grant Agreement, refer to research data management. So here in Horrizon Europe, we no longer focus on open access to research data, but in the broader concept of research data management, and research data management in line with FAIR, with the principles that I previously mentioned. Our beneficiaries will have to establish and regularly update a DMP, a data management plan, for generated and or collected data, and as soon as possible and within the deadlines that they set out in this DMP, data management plan, deposit the data in a trusted repository Some call conditions may require that this repository is federated in the European Open Science Cloud and ensure open access under CC BY, Creative Commons Attribution, CC0, Public Domain Dedication, or equivalent, following the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. What does this principle mean? That we allow for exceptions to the openness of research data, exceptions that are provided for in the Horrizon Europe regulation, such as legitimate interest, concerns of the beneficiaries, commercial exploitation, so a set of conditions that allow for research data to remain closed. Beneficiaries will also have to provide information via the repository about any research output, tool, or instrument needed to reuse or validate the data. So as you can see in Horrizon Europe, we put a strong emphasis in the validation of the conclusions of publications, as I mentioned before, and here in the reuse and validation of data and the tools, the information about the tools that are needed to achieve that aim. And also again, a parallel provision such as we have for publications, metadata must be open under a public domain dedication or equivalent. But here, this is a difference with regard to the metadata of publication that must be open. With regard to research data, there can be exceptions, again here to the extent legitimate interest or constraints are safeguarded and in line with the FAIR principles. And then we have a third category of obligations for the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement that are the additional open science practices beyond open access to publications and research data management. Where the call conditions impose additional obligations regarding open science practices, the beneficiaries must also comply with those. So additional obligations imposed by the call conditions. Then we have also the possibility of additional obligations that may be imposed via the call conditions regarding the validation of scientific publications. The beneficiaries must provide digital or physical access to data or other results which are needed for the validation of the conclusions of scientific publications, to the extent that their legitimate interest or constraints are safeguarded. So here, as you can see, we include data, but also other results. So we go broader than data, and those results that are needed to validate the conclusions of scientific publication. And this provision has been included in the general annexes of the main work program and therefore applies to all those calls. The same goes for this provision that says that where the call conditions impose additional open science obligations in case of public emergency, the beneficiaries must, if requested by the granting authority, immediately deposit any research output in a repository and provide open access to it under CC BY, CC0 or equivalent. And there we have some exceptions in case this access would not be provided open access, then it should be non-exclusive licenses under fair and reasonable conditions. So here we are talking about any research output, if requested by the granting authority in case of public emergency. So those are the obligations that our beneficiaries will have per the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. Then here what you can see is a difference between those mandatory and recommended open science practices, as we refer to them now in Horrizon Europe. I presented those that are mandatory. You can see their open access to publications, open access to data with exceptions, measures to ensure the reproducibility of research outputs and research output management, the DMP, those are mandatory. But beyond those mandatory practices, we have recommended practices, open science practices. And which are those recommended open science practices? We can say that those which are not mandatory are recommended open science practices. We include information about some of them in the Horrizon Europe program guide, which is already published and that I invited you to consult together with useful resources on those practices. And those include, for example, early and open sharing of research via pre-registration, registered reports, preprints, openly shared before the peer review, crowdsourcing. This is very much encouraged and recommended. Another, for example, open science practice is the participation in open peer review. Another one and very relevant is the involvement of all relevant knowledge actors, involvement of citizens, civil society, and end users in co-creation of content. So those open science practices are listed in the template for proposals. And as I mentioned before, the description of these practices and resources about these practices are available in the Horrizon Europe program guide. And what are they relevant, all these open science practices? First, because we believe in open science is key for research. And in practical terms, for those wanting to be beneficiaries of Horrizon Europe, because they will be taken into account in the evaluation of proposals. They will be taken into account under the excellence criterion as part of the methodology and under quality and efficiency of implementation. Under the excellence criterion, there will be an evaluation of the quality of the open science practices, and they will have to provide up to 1 page to describe these open science practices and up to 1 page to describe research data or research output management. It's not a DMP per se, which that will be a deliverable per month 6, but up to 1 page to describe how they are planning on managing the research data and research output. And then under quality and efficiency of implementation, we will have to explain expertise on open science. And in the list of publications, include publications, software, data relevant to the project with a qualitative assessment. And very important here, publications are expected to be open access. Data sets are expected to be fair and as open as possible, as close as necessary. And the significance of publications to be evaluated on the basis of proposers' qualitative assessment and not per the journal impact factor. This is key and also very much in our narrative about the importance of evaluating research per its own merit and not using the journal impact factor as the sole proxy for the quality of research. So to be evaluated on the basis of proposers' qualitative assessment. Nota bene on evaluation. Evaluation, as I mentioned, concerns both the mandatory and the recommended open science practices. When open science practices are duly justified as not appropriate for the project, the score will not be lower for not addressing those practices or for a lack of open science expertise. Let me insist here, duly justified as not appropriate for the project. In the case of those which are mandatory with regard to publications, research data, or those additional open science practices, it's, for example, if there are no publications, if there is no generated or reused data. And the evaluation of open science practices is part of all work programs, except for the European Research Council. And some European Innovation Council programs for now evaluate under impact. And there may be variations in the page limits in some of the proposals templates. So for the various specificities, I encourage you to go to the templates to check those. Where to find all this information? In the funding and tender portal of the European Commission. Then there are the links to the Horrizon Europe regulation, the Horrizon Europe Model Grant Agreement, very soon the annotated grant agreement, the program guide that I mentioned with guidance on the open science practices with a specific focus on the proposal stage, while the annotated grant agreement focuses on how to meet the obligations that are in the model grant agreement. And also, I invite you, if interested in applying, to follow or to watch now, because those took place in the past, the webinars on how to prepare a successful proposal in Horrizon Europe, with open science being part of those webinars, the slides being available, and also very interesting Q&As that we responded during those webinars. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Sanguma. That's very insightful for that wealth of information. So on behalf of everyone, I thank you very much. So very quickly, I think again we'll be talking about the evaluation of proposals later on during the webinar. But at this stage, I want to hop into the innovation gap. Change is needed, of course, as Europe enters a fourth wave of innovation. Now, the argument here is that research and development investment on its own, it does not trigger the same returns on investment everywhere. And one of the reasons for the still existing enormous gap between EU countries is the inability or the ability to keep up to date with digital innovation that seriously impacts knowledge sharing. And so here we are with this innovation divide between countries, which really prevents the EU as a whole from exploiting its research and innovation potential to the maximum capacity, which is unfortunate because it's a major threat to its economic growth and the prosperity and the social stability. Dr. Errington, can you share your thoughts on if or what your feel is regarding Horrizon Europe's program Bridging this Divide? What are your thoughts on this front?
Great, thanks. Happy to chat about this. Have my slides up. And a disclaimer when I'm chatting this is I don't speak on behalf of obviously the European Commission here. So I'm going to give you my perspective as someone both in the United States and working for a nonprofit, largely focused in open science. So one of the things, before I get into kind of discussing some of that, is seeing what that gap is. And I think there's a really nice way of doing this. Hopefully the viewers of this know the European Innovation Score card is a great way to kind of see exactly what you were just describing, this innovation gap that exists within the EU. This is the most recent one that was just released last month, I believe. And it shows that there is indeed, right, that you have this variance in performance geographically, where you have, depending on how much innovation is occurring, it varies a lot by different countries. And they broke it up, as you can see in the colors here, between kind of innovation leaders, strong innovators, moderate, and emerging innovators. What will be interesting, and you're absolutely right, which is how does the Horrizon Europe influence this in the coming years with that budget to help accelerate this, especially in certain key areas. And I'll come back to that in a second. And there's also, I won't speak into it a bit, but there's also the cohesion policy that's a part of this as well, to kind of build the innovation capacity and the skills to be able to support that. But before we get into that, something else that's really helpful is to think through, what does it mean to be thinking of innovation in an open sense, and how did we shift to a more open innovation? So this is just some background that I'll give that kind of I'll come back to at the end in terms of where I see there's opportunities and challenges in terms of navigating this. So if we think on the left side here of the screen of how innovation used to occur in a closed model, a lot of this was the norms at the time were around the practical use of science would come without much help from scientists themselves, right? At that moment, there was not a lot, as there is today, investment from the government or even at the institutions to do more than the basic research. Most of that was occurring at industry R&D laboratories. So the logic of the closed innovation model that occurred was that in order to be good at research and development, you had to be big. And in order to innovate effectively in this model, one had to do everything, right? For all the tools, the materials, the product design, manufacturing, sales, service support, everything was done in-house. And it really meant that in order to advance knowledge, it was those huge industry champions that were going to stand and command the heights of economic development. But as we just heard, right, there's open science practices are on the rise and hopefully will get pushed even farther. And what that means is that we're having an abundance of knowledge and people that understand and have access to that knowledge. In a lot and growing number of scientific fields, this is occurring. So this proliferation of databases, open access journals, preprints, the articles are available. And with like I said, with the low cost access to internet and transmission to society allows a lot of access of knowledge. And we'll get into kind of how that actually navigates two different directions, that movement. So open innovation, unlike the closed one, is actually based on that logic of abundant knowledge of open science. So one good definition that has been put out there is it's the use of purposely inflows and outflows of knowledge to accelerate internal innovation and expand the markets for external use of innovation. Something to think through, just as a kind of comparison, I always think those are really nice, is how things operate between the closed and the open. In the open, it was always thought that smart people in the field would work for that institution. Everyone would be in-house, you'd grow that talent and keep it in-house. It's not really occurring anymore. Now we know that there's smart people all around us, and that is actually people's jobs to, and companies' jobs to find that knowledge, tap into the expertise of individuals that are outside of the company. In the closed, the profit from R&D must be done because you discovered it, developed it, and did everything to shipping it yourself. you don't have to. This open model allows that to have an internal and external component of it, depending on how you see the value gain and how you can contribute and exploit the surrounding environment. Like I said, also, a lot of it was if you discovered it yourselves, you'd be the first one to go to market, and that the company that gets an innovation to the market first will win. We don't see that as much anymore in an open innovation model. Open innovation model says that you don't have to originate the research to profit from it. Others can. Academic research can do that. And building a better business model is more important than getting to the market first. Now, a couple more here is the idea that if in the closed model, if we create the most and the best ideas in the industry, that's how you win, right? That you should control the IP so that the competitors do not profit from them. We don't see that, and we don't want to encourage that in an open innovation model where you want to make best use of the internal and external ideas, and that you can profit from others' IP as well as letting others use your IP. So a very different shift that allows essentially more stakeholders into the equation. As I said, let's go a little bit farther into here in terms of just thinking about those two flows of knowledge, because I want to kind of come back to that in terms of how that is influenced by open science. So we have two key aspects, outside in and inside out. So the outside in proportion of open innovation involves opening up a company's innovation processes to many kinds of external inputs and contributions. So citizen science is a great example of that. It's the aspect of open innovation that's received the greatest attention as well. Both in academia, where we see this in citizen science, but we also see that in industry practice as well. There's a flip side to this, though, that's not really understood well because it's not used as much in academic or industry practice yet, is this inside-out approach. So open innovation requires organizations to allow either unused or underutilized ideas to go outside the organization for others to use in their businesses and their business models. So this is in contrast to the outside in approach. And like I said, it's not been explored as much, and I think it's an area of growth as we move towards this in the future. All right. This is a statement that we can't say yet. We don't know if open science directly leads to innovation. I think it does. I'd like to believe it, but that's an incredible claim, and an incredible claim requires extraordinary evidence. We don't have that yet. It's growing, and I think it'll be very interesting to keep an eye on this. Part of it is through the rise of open science in more recent era, and also as part of it is understanding how long it takes to measure whether innovation is occurring. So there is a big time, and there's definitely a lot of research that's going on to it to understand the time from discovery, early discoveries, all the way through to the marketplace. So it'll be very interesting to watch this, but I think we cannot say yet that this is true. But what we can say is that open innovation depends on open science, just as I was mentioning before, that if we don't have access to that knowledge, it doesn't work, right? Open innovation is dependent upon that useful knowledge is abundant. It's everywhere. We can get access to this. And so if we don't have access to this, then we're actually not going to be able to achieve and continue to advance open innovation. When we think through how open innovation initiatives begin, they do begin by kind of surveying what's already available. So instead of reinventing the wheel, an open innovation project will seek to leverage available external knowledge and extend that. Or you can put it differently, right? Where you have abundant knowledge, where you have access to a lot of information, the value in innovation migrates away from the next new piece of technology. It doesn't mean that that's not still valuable. And instead, it moves it towards integrating technologies, right? Putting these to new uses, ones that were not originally there, and kind of understanding the pieces and how to put that together. So this is more of a systems approach to innovation. And again, many actors are still at play. Just because there are individuals or smaller companies that can come into this, large firms still play a key role in this, probably especially in this systems style approach of open innovation. All right. So since it's dependent upon open science, and we heard, I really appreciate the background of where the policies are moving towards to advance open science, there's still more in there that I think are continually neglected. One in particular, one that we focus a lot at the Center for Open Science on is null results. A lot of focus is on the positive results, both in the publication system and the way that we advance our knowledge. But what we have to remember is that the absence of a finding through a certain methodology is just as valuable, if not more. A well-designed experiment, regardless of what it finds, teaches us a lot. Same thing is true for making sure that those findings are reproducible. So I think these are neglected aspects only because they're not embedded yet into the current culture. not enough practice is occurring. And if it is occurring, it's definitely not being disseminated. And so this alignment between recognizing that it's not necessarily the finding that we as scientists control, it's actually the design of the experiment that we do, the questions that we ask, and that dissemination of all knowledge, positive or null, is vital. So again, when we think of open access itself, if it's still within the confines that open access is dictated only by the results, right? Large positive bias, publication bias, we're still missing this huge important aspect of the research enterprise of null results. There are other neglected aspects, and these are actually barriers to kind of expand upon kind of seeing the promise of open science. Really, part of this is caused by the bridge, the division that occurs between what certain individuals, institutions, countries, right, have available to them. So two kind of aspects. One is just resources, finance. It's great to have and invest into resources to give access, to the digital infrastructure that's there, or the publication fees that are required to get to open access. But that's going to have to operate differently based on where an individual or an institution is coming from. And because it can be impossible for some scientists to do this, especially early career researchers. There's a lack of job security. They can't pay these fees, or if it's not structured in a certain way, these mechanisms will actually get in the way. And again, these disparities exist. It's going to vary a lot depending on where you are in your career and what institution you're at, right? Versus teaching versus a research heavy one. So I think those are huge considerations to take into account, this equity. Related to that, there are social barriers. The norms of science are shifting, and it's important that the incentive system that's around it is aligned. So if we do not have that alignment between acknowledgement of open science practices as a good thing in science, then we're actually going to put some individuals at a disadvantage. Again, probably those early career researchers in particular. So examples could be open peer review. I think that's a great thing to do. I'm glad to see more encouragement, but if it is not recognized as something that is a valuable contribution, then especially an early career researcher who might make a critical comment of a more senior colleague's paper or findings might actually get hurt from a social aspect in terms of advancement of their career. We don't want that. So we're going to have to be very attentive to how to manage these kind of social norms within the system. And again, same thing goes for open access journals, right? If we do not align that it is not what the journal impact factor is, or the name of the journal that is important in terms of advancement of a career, it is more about the rigor, reproducibility, and openness of the research. That has to be aligned. So we don't want to have researchers who are pushed into open access journals, but are still being viewed that they have to publish in these quote unquote high prestige journals. So work will have to be, and attention will have to be there to make sure that we have alignment between our ideals of science and ideals of practices with the norms and the incentives that are occurring in terms of like just tenure and promotion is a good example. All right. I also want to think about how to help this innovation flourish. And really, it's to help consider both things that occur on both ends of the spectrum, open science that feeds into it, as well as how we're going to utilize that and advance that in terms of a more open model. One that others have definitely written about, and I think it's going to continue to be a growing area of attention, will be IP considerations. IP is obviously very important. It's evolved, but balancing it just right to not have it be kind of something that clogs the wheels of open science, while still enabling protection of individuals and companies to make those risky decisions as they advance something or attempt to advance something to the marketplace will be important, especially as we think about opening up more and more of the process, such as pre-registration or even access to underlying data and null results. I think these IP considerations should be thought through carefully so that we do not stifle innovation by either making it too rigid or too flexible. Something that I see that I think is a great idea are these clusters, essentially grand challenges that are in the Horrizon Europe approach, and I think it's the second pillar. Those are wonderful ideas that are very important because you have immediate influx of knowledge, or you will get through investment in certain key critical areas. I think something that's important about that is if, again, we don't pay attention to the fact that there are many contributors, they have different roles within that, we will essentially default back into groupthink. Big research will only reward institutions and individuals that are capable of that, opposed to recognizing that the advantage we have is actually very different views and different roles within the process, even if we focus on these grand challenges. So finding, again, that balance will be very important to enable the innovation to truly flourish across a wide range of capabilities. The last one that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit more is there's a challenge as we do this, and there's a growth of data. Research is constantly generating more and more knowledge. You see that just through the number of publications and the growth of that over the years. As we understand that actually those publications are not actually even all the knowledge that's there, it's the data and the ideas that sit behind it, the contributions that can occur through pre-registration, earlier aspects, earlier artifacts of the research process. Can get more and more null results done, more and more replications done. What we're going to have, and what we have now currently, is a data challenge, not insurmountable, but something to, I think, pay attention to enable it to flourish. A good example of that is a DARPA-funded program that we're a part of to evaluate the credibility of claims. It's called SCORE, Systemizing Confidence in Open Research and Evidence. And I think this style of thinking of saying, how do I understand what is credible and reproducible claims versus those incredible but maybe questionable and uncertain claims is going to be that much more important as we kind of think through how we move things from basic science into advancement into the marketplace for advancing peers and understanding the world around us. And again, not an insurmountable one, but investment in data science and investment in these types of approaches, as well as having alignment with earlier processes to have alignment for high rigor and open sharing throughout the entire research process will help us do this and actually help us innovate probably in ways that we've never imagined before. So I want to end with actually rethinking a very, very common quote from Thomas Edison, right, about failing many times because you only needed to succeed one time. And we know this, but we think about it many times. I think people think about it as I, as an individual, I as Thomas Edison, I as the researcher. I think what we have to do is flip that out and say, we as the research community can do this. We can actually all fail, all have our null results, sharing that and collectively come to the one way that will work. So with that, just want to say thank you. And I guess we'll have questions at the end. And of course, my information is available and I think will be shared out at the end. So.
Thank you, Directorate. And I particularly enjoyed the part where you spoke about the neglected aspects of open science, because I think it's still not embedded into the current culture. So thank you for your valuable insights. So moving on, open science means sharing knowledge, but also sharing data and tools as early and openly as possible. And to this end, Horrizon Europe has introduced several novelties with which institutions and researchers must comply with according to their open access obligations. One of the concerns questions that we repeatedly receive from the research community that follow our webinars is the evaluation of proposals. Ms. Sanguma, she did introduce us to the evaluation criteria, but I also would like to invite the expert on this front, Mr. Xavier Aubry, to present his insights into the open science requirements in Horrizon Europe.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, indeed, the previous speakers have already offered an excellent overview of the criteria. So I want to give you a little bit of a view of from the applicant side. And here, of course, the reason why I can give you that view is that I've been involved in many proposals, and together with my team, we generally write together with the research and technology organization the proposals that are submitted to the program, and which are later evaluated. So we get exposed to different types of consortia, different types of approach, and of course, certain challenges when it comes to open science, depending on the composition of the consortia. So the idea is to give you more of this view of what happens behind the scenes when you are preparing the proposal, which has to be developed with the open science principles in mind. So I want to go briefly to the evaluation process to be able to discuss how it impacts the proposal development process. And then we'll speak a bit about, of course, open science and also other things like gender dimension, which are also really important. The evaluation process have not been described before. I can spend a little bit of time here explaining that this is a consensus process. So when you are filing a collaborative proposal, you probably know that this proposal will be evaluated individually by experts. These experts are not employee of the Commission. They are third-party experts who are working for the Commission on a particular contract for the duration of that call topic evaluation. The number of experts will depend on the call. It's minimum 3, but it can go up to 5 or even more. And in the initial phase, the expert will analyze your project, will read the application, will assess the quality of the open science methodology himself or herself, producing an individual evaluation report before then meeting with the other experts in a consensus. Normally in Brussels, in the current conditions, often consensus are of course organized remotely, but we hope that face-to-face Brussels consensus meeting will resume very soon. Now, during the consensus meeting, the expert will agree or disagree on certain aspects, and one of them can be open science. And this discussion will lead to a final scoring of the proposal. And the scoring in this particular case of collaborative programs is not an average of the score of the evaluators. The evaluators really have to agree on one particular score between 0 and 15. But as you can see in the reports, often your score will be between 10 and 15. The problem is that in a very competitive call, only proposals scoring 14 or 14.5 or 15 will get funded. So it only takes the evaluators to decide to downgrade you by half a point, for example, because they're not convinced with the open science methodology, and suddenly you're not in the funded list anymore. So this is why those details are extremely important, because they're not details, in fact, they are quite fundamental in any proposal. So if you look at the score, which I was just mentioning, obviously it's a bell curve. A lot of the scores end up around the 10, 11 mark. And many people will think this is a good score. You know, I scored 10, it's above the threshold. There's the so-called technical threshold, which is the minimum threshold you would need to be able to claim funding. But in practice, this is not the funding threshold. The funding threshold is generally way above that. It will be 13, 14, sometimes even more. Now, there are calls where only one proposal is funded, and it will be the max score, which is 15 in that case. So the challenge is when you have a proposal and you get that ESR and you start to analyze it to try to understand how you can improve it for a further opportunity, you should never think that because you're already at 11 or 12, you have a good proposal. In fact, you have an average proposal. And to bring it from average to good will take a lot of time. But once you are around 12, 13, you're still not there. If you really want to be guaranteed funding, you need to go to 14 or 15 points to a truly excellent proposal. And that effort, just to bring a proposal from say good to excellent, is exactly the same effort as writing it from scratch, almost. So don't let yourself in a comfort thinking, okay, I've done most of the work, I'm 80% there. If I resubmit something similar with a little bit of improvement, it will work, because that is not the case. So when you do your proposal development process, the first thing you have to do is to create a process. And that's often what's missing. Because you have many consortium partners, I mean, a typical call can be anywhere between, say, 5 or 6 partners up to 30, 40 partners in very large calls. This is the real challenge. Simply because these partners by nature will have different priorities, allocations of their time. And it's the same for open science. If you have a consortium, balanced consortium, which will include naturally RTOs, research inclusion organizations like academic partners and research centers, as well as industrial partners, small ones, SMEs, large ones, industrial partners, corporates, and even public bodies. I mean, you could have a border police or a city authority in the consortium. These people have very different views of open science. Some of them care a lot about it, in particular in the academic world, and some of them do not care so much about it. If you are a large corporate, for example. In fact, some of the large corporates might really not want to communicate or to disseminate this open science. So there's a natural tension that you need to resolve from the beginning, because you cannot afford to be blackmailed by one large partner. In the worst case scenario, which I have lived myself once, was that we had a large software company, which I will not name here, but during the process, essentially told us, well, we don't want to disseminate heavily. We're going to have to agree on every single thing that should be disseminated. And this was 3 weeks before the deadline. And they put their lawyers in, and they clearly told us, if you do not agree, we'll leave the consortium. that's not a good situation to be in, because obviously it completely contradicts the open science principles, and you need to talk about that earlier. Now, most companies now, even the large ones, are familiar with the open science requirements. So you can imagine that they'll know what they are committing to. But it's something that you should always check, because it only takes, to have a new person that has never worked in EU projects and we suddenly realize that this is not aligned at all with what the enterprise wants to do. So clarify that as early as possible. Create a common vision. This is, for example, fairly easy to address in your first consortium call. I mean, the first consortium call, when you bring everyone together to discuss the vision of the project, the innovation tracks, there should be a small section on open science to clarify what you will do in terms of open publications, but also in terms of fair data management. Data is usually a little bit more tricky, because open publications, well, different partners can agree that certain parts of the projects will be easy to publish in open peer-reviewed journals. But data is tricky, because some of the data can be very, very sensitive if it relates to a large corporate who doesn't necessarily want to publish it. So then you may have to decide subset of data or certain parts of the data that you can actually release, while some others will not be released. As one of the previous speakers was saying, there are cases where there are good reasons not to do that. And of course, when we talk about, for example, the security work program, I mean, clearly in some of the counterterrorism cybersecurity project, we're not going to openly publish data about the critical infrastructure that we're trying to protect. But these are really exceptions, and they need to be well documented. It cannot just be the corporate saying, I want to keep that proprietary because it's to my advantage. That's not a good reason to do that. Keep in mind, by the way, that even in mono-applicant programs like the EIC Accelerator, there are also requests to at least show what is the open data methodology. It's not, in that case, a requirement, meaning that you will not be disqualified if you do not have an open strategy in place, open science strategy in place. But there is a document. In fact, the data management program, the DMP, the data management plan has to be part of the application. And so even in mono-applicant program like the EIC Accelerator, where you only have one company, private company involved, you still have to show a DMP. Okay, so the final thing I want to say here about the proposal development process is that you will have many people talking, and all of them have their own opinion, and that can include, in fact, how do we implement open science? And maybe there are different flavors of it, and one academic will say that, another research partner will say this, another industry will say that. In the end, this is not a democracy. You will have to perform this task and to develop the proposal on a very short time frame. And you need to do it as quickly as possible. So I recommend to seek some pre-agreement, but then define very clearly in your consortium who is the final decision maker. So if there is some disagreement, someone, typically the coordinator, if he's in charge of the technical activities, will have the final word if there is a disagreement. You cannot let it to a sort of a democracy where everyone can decide everything. This just doesn't work when you are trying to write a proposal in a couple of weeks before the deadline, which is almost all cases like this, especially with the new program, which was released very late. Everyone is really busy right now. They're already deadline September, October. You cannot spend 3 or 4 weeks to agree on what are your open science protocols. Few novelties I want to highlight. The first one is about key impact pathways. That's actually for section 2. So you could think it's not really directly related to open science, because as the previous speaker said, the evaluation criteria are mostly in section 1 and section 3. But that's not exactly the case. In the key impact pathways, as you can see, one of the impact pathways is scientific impact. And obviously open science is a huge way of driving that impact. So if you have a good open science methodology, this is an asset that you should put forward into your section 2 as part of the key impact pathways. The second thing I want to flag is obviously the evolution. As you heard before, now there are a lot more mandatory aspects. Some of them are still optional, but at a minimum, you need to bring that 1 page on open science practices and 1 page on data management in section 1. This is actually required in the new template. So, and it's quite a lot of space if you think about it, because the average template has only 45 pages. And if you look at the content inside the template, it's pretty much the same as the 70-page template from Horrizon 2020. There are a few exceptions. For example, the governance of the consortium has disappeared, but essentially we're trying to cram 65 pages of text into 45. That's the new game that we are all in. And out of this 40 pages, 45 pages, you need to already use 2 entire pages, or it says up to 1 page, of course, it could be a bit less, to describe those activities. So keep that in mind when you are writing. There are also some evaluation criteria in implementation, but these are more indirect. You don't have to have a lot of text about that. What the evaluators will try to assess is, do you have the expertise for open science? Because obviously it would be very strange if in an industry-driven consortium, for example, innovation action, very few academic partners, and none of them have serious open science expertise. That would be a problem. So here you need to highlight the people in your team that would be able to take the lead in this. You also are supposed to list the open access publication and the FAIR data set that you will generate as part of the project. That's something obviously that you will put as deliverables in your work program. And there is a mandatory deliverable, which is the data management plan, the DMP. This one you need to have in any case. Finally, don't forget and don't underestimate the items of the new Form A. As you know now, Section 4 does not exist anymore. So the only place you can put information about each organization is in the online Form A, which includes a profile of each partner. And the previous information, like the relevant publication, the scientist involved, that is now part of this Form A. So in this Form A, you do have to indicate relevant publication with persistent identifiers. And think about it when you do this, because if you start adding lots of publication and none of them are open access, that gives a pretty bad feeling to the evaluator who thinks that you're going to be doing open access. It's not a requirement. I mean, you could be doing completely closed access and then decide suddenly to go public with this particular project, but it doesn't give them a huge confidence that you are able to handle open access. So the history, the track record is important, but also going forward, of course, the new publication that you will need to do, they should be in open access journals. So if you start listing a list of publications, make sure that they have an open access option. And the criteria is the gender dimension, not really directly related to open access, but I think it's important to keep that in mind because it's also a criteria that can easily remove you half a point if you don't do it properly. There are 3 dimensions here. One is purely on the eligibility side. There's a requirement that any RTO or public body starting next year, so it's not yet valid, but will be for next year, has to have a gender equality plan in place, which essentially is a formal document signed by the management and published on their website, which describes their gender equality plan organization. Currently, this is a self-declaration in Form A in 2021. And in course 2022, you will also have to declare it, but it will become a requirement. So you can expect the evaluators to go and check if that policy really exists. The second element is the gender dimension in the proposal. Now here, don't confuse that with gender balance. I often see people that start explaining in the gender dimension that they have a team which is fully balanced and this and that. That is not at all what it means. The gender dimension is actually the relevance of integrating sex and gender analysis in your research. I mean, you might be looking at developing a drug for a disease that is maybe more prevalent in women than men. And in that case, you need to accept that. You need to make sure that your population will be sufficient in both sex to be able to analyze that. Or you could also work in a technology where gender has a huge impact because of the way it's used by the different genders. So here, it's more about analyzing the impact of your research and the relations towards sex and gender. It is, by the way, mandatory to provide an answer unless the topic specifically says that you don't have to. But in most cases, it is required. And finally, there is indeed gender balance, but it is only used as a tiebreaker. So essentially, if 2 proposals would have the exact same scores, the same impact score as well, then the third tiebreaker would be the number of, the balance essentially between men and women in the team. And here there's a little trick, which is that the only way for the evaluators to look at this is to go to Form A, where they will have the list of your researchers with their gender. The problem is that currently this Form A is meant for researchers only. So it really says list your researchers. So what happens to this marketing specialist you have, which will be in charge of dissemination exploitation? Is that a researcher? I don't know. I would recommend to include them because I think obviously they are part of your team. They will be performing activities in the project, and I don't see why they would be excluded from the gender balance. but it's really not clear from the current form what type of profile you should be involved. And in the Q&A from the Commission, the answer was, don't put them into Form A. Instead, write in the document, the main document, where you only have 45 pages, what these other people will do. I personally think it's a bad idea, because I'm pretty sure that in that case, they will not be considered for the gender balance. So I think this is one of the problems of Form A, the new version, that the Commission has to solve. Okay, final advice. When you are going to go for a proposal, this is a huge amount of work. You have to be prepared for 400 hours of work for the lead partners. This is massive. We're talking 3 months full time. And you may not have that amount of time available at your hands. You cannot afford to do less, because if you want to be on the top score, 14 or 15, you need to address all the evaluation criteria, including open science. You need to have a very nice looking proposal, which is easy to read because the evaluators don't have that much time, and only excellent application will get funded. On top of that, the new program from the Commission has one big drawback, which is that there are lots of topics, more than usual, and each topic can fund a very small number of proposals, typically between 1 and 4 proposals. This is much worse than when you had topics which could fund between 3 and 10 proposals. If you are gunning or aiming for a topic which can fund only 1 or 2 proposals, you are essentially sensitive to 2 big problems. One is internal lobbying. You do not know how strong the other consortium are. In security, for example, they are big defense contractor, and they might be the one winning the project. And this is nothing you can do about. You can write the best possible proposal. In the end, they have the clout. You can also suffer from what we call the outlier effect. If you have only 1 proposal funded, it only takes 1 jury member or group of jury members who is extremely happy about 1 proposal and will overscore it. And once that proposal is scored at 15 points, that's the one who will win. And yes, in theory, there is a panel at the end of the jury that will sort of reevaluate the proposal to find out, if really they are at the right level. So in theory, the 15 point could go down, but it's very unlikely. So here again, when you have only 1 proposal that will be funded, this is something that you should really think of. Do you really have the best possible proposal, and you know that you will win? I don't think anyone can say that. I would encourage the Commission to really consider funding more proposals and having less topics, but they have taken another approach. Similarly, there are 2 types of proposal, 1 stage and 2 stage. 2 stage are really interesting because you de-risk your process. First, you do a 10-page proposal, and if this proposal is funded, then you go to the 2nd stage. So that means that a lot of proposals get kicked out in the first process, and you don't have to write the full proposal. Unfortunately, these are still a minority of proposals. Most topics are single stage, which means that everyone takes the full risk. So you're talking about 100 applicants filing a 45-page proposal, and only 1 will get funded at the end. That's what you have to be prepared for currently in the status. So don't forget your open science methodologies. Remember that this will be one of the criteria among others. If you have not done it before, I really suggest that the best way is to join a consortium with experienced coordinators. That's the best way to start. If you don't have that luxury, go out and select consultants to help you who also have the expertise. But in any case, find expertise. Don't try it for yourself. First-timers are usually very unsuccessful because they don't master all of these risks. And then once you've made that decision, make sure to start early enough. For example, now, I don't think it's a good idea to start preparing proposal for September, October. It's already too late. There are people that started to prepare them even before the programs were published because they had access to the drafts. So now you're fighting against people who have already 3 months head start on you. But if you're looking at November, December, and next year, there are plenty of interesting topics, and then you have enough time. Normally, you have to count on 3 months to build the consortium, 3 months to write the proposal. That means 6 months. But you can sometimes compress it in 3 to 4 months if you are extremely well organized, and if you have the support of either an experienced coordinator or a specialized consultant. Good luck with your proposal, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aubry, for that golden piece of information, and it was very thorough. We are running a bit behind our schedule, and I would like to just hop directly into the Q&A. Maybe I will pick 1 or 2 questions. I think one has already been answered by Mr. Román. I will very quickly read it for anyone else who's interested in knowing the answer. So the question was from Stephanie Palvast. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Will journals included in the transformative agreement also be considered full open access venues as per Plan S. And I will read Ms. Sangoman's answer, and if you wish to jump in, Ms. Sanguma, please do. Plan S recognizes these routes towards compliance with its principles: full open access venues, the repository route, and the transformative arrangements. With regards to Horrizon Europe, publication fee in hybrid journals will not be eligible for reimbursement, no matter whether these journals are covered by the transformative agreements or not. Then there's a second question: is gender dimension mandatory for CSA actions? Perhaps Mr. Aubry, would you like to take that question?
You mean the second question?
Yes. Is the gender dimension mandatory for CSA actions?
Well, I mean, it depends on the core topic. You have to look at what the core topic is about. There can be exceptions. In general, it is mandatory unless the core topic says it's not. That's valid for any instrument.
Perfect. Great. And perhaps maybe one last question. Innovation potential, innovation capacity, and innovation management are no longer included in the evaluation sub-criteria. Why has the focus shifted? Just one of our panelists wish to.
Yeah, not sure I can respond for probably someone from the Commission should answer that, but yes, it is now different. Although there is a key impact pathways, which in my opinion replicate the same type of approach.
Would you like to comment on this, Ms. Sanguma?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, because
sure.
It was quite fast, or can I read it somewhere?
Sure. Innovation potential, innovation capacity, and innovation management are no longer included in the evaluation sub-criteria.
Okay.
Why has the focus shifted?
But I'm afraid that is not within our realm, innovation capacity, so I cannot give the reasons behind that choice. So.
Sure. Okay. Perhaps maybe we will replace this with one last question. In a nutshell, and Mr. Aubry did comment on this earlier. In a nutshell, what are the changes in impact between Horrizon 2020 and Horrizon Europe?
Well, I think there's a clear will from the Commission to make sure that the consortium are showing impact, which means the results of the project will serve a bigger purpose at the end of the project. I personally like the evolution. I think this is on the right way. It was already present in Horrizon 2020, but I think it was a bit limited because often what we saw was either an academic approach, the FP7 style with the dissemination plan, the exploitation plan, and it was essentially a laundry list of things which were quite boring to read. And you could even receive from the evaluators the typical comment, your dissemination plan is generic, please be more specific. Or it would become a really long list and you don't have space for that. Keep in mind that we only have 45 pages, so it's really not the same. You really have to describe that without resorting to this long list of all the publications you want to do and all the activities you want to do. You have to summarize that. There was another track which was more related to exploitation in Horrizon 2020, which was the sort of business plan. Again, here, it was the equivalent of the academic part, but for the industrials. And here you would get like a big block with NPV, IRR, and other dimension, which to me didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I know how to write that, of course, but I don't think average evaluator will enjoy reading things about the NPV of a particular project. So I think the solution brought by the Commission was really nice, that to create this new criteria called key impact pathways. The acronym is a bit confusing because it's KIP and it has nothing to do with KPIs, which are the key performance indicators. So make sure that you don't mix up those two. But the key impact pathways is a very nice framework to link the actual exploitable results to an outcome and to an impact. And that can be summarized in a couple of pictures and illustrations, which makes it easier for the evaluator to understand what you're doing. So I think this is the big innovation in the section 2 of the proposal, which I think will make it a lot more interesting to read, but also will force people to think, because not yet you have to make logical links. Before you could just list a laundry of things, I will do dissemination on this magazine and on that, and I will bring this to the students. Yes, nice, but now you have to really think about the impact of a particular outcome and how you will create the exploitable result and how you will disseminate it or exploit it to support this particular outcome. I think that is a good development.
Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you for your precious time and valuable insights. On behalf of everyone who's joining us today, I would like to once again thank the panelists for taking the time to address these concerns. A recording of the webinar, for those of you who joined late, a recording of the webinar is being parallelly streamed on YouTube, on the My Science Work YouTube channel. So if you want, you can feel free to check that out. And the slides, as many of you requested, will be shared via email, as will be a certificate of participation for those who wish to have one. So on that note, this is a wrap, and thank you very much for joining us, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.